Hello, I'm Suzanne James. Welcome to Nightshift, where we talk all things voluntary assisted dying in Australia. Today we are joined by Penny Neller. Penny is Project Manager of End-of-Life Law for Clinicians at the Australian Centre of Health Law Research, attached to Queensland University of Technology. End-of-Life Law for Clinicians is a free training program for health professionals wanting to learn more about voluntary assisted dying and other end-of-life laws in Australia. Penny has also recently hosted a podcast for GPs about the legal and practical aspects of first conversations about voluntary assisted dying. To talk to us some more about all that, Penny joins us now from the Queensland University of Technology. Penny Neller, welcome.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you so much for your time today. Now, as a project manager, you are involved in 3 key programs at the End-of-Life Law Centre. Tell us a bit more about your role and how your programs are delivered to clinicians who are working in the end-of-life space.
Thanks. So my main role is managing the End-of-Life Law for Clinicians training program, as you already said. We also call that ELLC or ELLC, and it delivers free training for all Australian health professionals and health students about end-of-life decision-making laws. It's funded by the Australian Department of Health, Disability and Ageing, and our main goals are to improve clinicians' knowledge of law and also their confidence applying the law in their practice, and also supporting them to make practice changes so they can deliver the best possible care to people approaching the end of their lives. We have 4 online training courses that are free, and they cover 14 areas of end-of-life law, including voluntary assisted dying. And some of the other topics, which many of your listeners would already be familiar with, are the laws relating to advanced care directives, decision-making capacity and consent, substitute decision-making, pain relief, etc. And we also deliver workshops for health professionals. So you mentioned our VAD podcast, and building on that, we are hosting a national voluntary assisted dying webinar for GPs on the 26th of May. It's being presented by my colleague, who's a VAD researcher, Dr. Eliana Close, and she's presenting with Dr. Penelope Burns, who's a New South Wales VAD practitioner. So that one's targeted at GPs who are quite new to VAD and want to learn a little bit more about it, and they'll be exploring a VAD case study, educating GPs about key VAD laws. You also mentioned some of the other projects I'm involved in. So one that might be of interest to your listeners is a website called End of Life Law in Australia. And that's a resource we've developed for the community as well as health professionals and policymakers, and they can access easy to understand, up-to-date information about the law in their state and territory. And we have a dedicated web page which explores each state and territory's laws about VAD. And then the third project I'm involved in is End-of-Life Directions for Aged Care, which is also known as LDAC. That's a national advisory service for GPs and health professionals who work in aged care. As part of that, we've developed an end-of-life law toolkit for aged people working in aged care, and that has fact sheets and case studies and mythbusters on a range of topics, but a lot of our content there is also about voluntary assisted dying.
The recent Go Gentle Australia State of VAD report highlighted the increase in uptake of VAD by terminally ill Australians. The State of VAD report also noted the workforce challenges those increased numbers present going forward. Obviously, your training programs are critical for both the current and future VAD clinicians' workforce for a number of reasons, but what, in your view, are the main reasons these training programs and resources are so important?
So there are a number of reasons why we developed these resources, and also why we believe training and education about end-of-life law and also VAD laws is really important for health professionals. And the first is that, of course, health professionals caring for someone at the end of life have a really significant clinical role, but they also have a legal role. So when they do things like determining if a person lacks decision-making capacity, or looking at following a person's advanced care directive, or working out who a person's substitute decision maker is if they can't decide, they're performing a legal role. We know from previous research that we've done at QUT that some health professionals, even those who are involved in those types of decisions every day, have significant knowledge gaps about what the law says. So knowing those laws is important, not only for providing that high quality care to patients and their families, but also so that they know what is lawful, what is not, where they can go to access legal information, and also how to manage any legal issues that arise in their practice. And as you said, VAD is still relatively new. I'm only in Australia since 2019, and it's still a new area for many health professionals. And our VAD laws do place specific legal obligations on them that they need to follow. A GP, for example, needs to be prepared for what to do if a patient asks them about VAD, about accessing it, or simply asking for some information about it. They need to know to what extent they're able to discuss VAD, understand eligibility criteria and what the process involves. So our training can support health professionals to do those things.
One of the areas advocates often get asked about is in relation to advanced care planning, particularly for things like dementia-related diagnosis, and what can and cannot be achieved with advanced care plans. You cannot include any advanced requests for voluntary assisted dying in case of any future terminal diagnosis, dementia-related included. Talk us through the medico-legal issues around advanced care planning and things like nominating medical decision makers and situations where decision-making capacity is lost for the patient. How do people ensure they create plans that are valid and that will be followed at the bedside when the time comes, and why an advanced preference for VAD can't currently be included?
I'll talk a little bit first about the legal framework and then about validity of directives. And many listeners may already know, there are a number of ways under our laws that we can make plans for future healthcare or medical treatment, and we can do that when we still have decision-making capacity. So the first way is that in all states and territories, a person can make an advanced care directive, which is a legal document in which you can outline your decisions and instructions and preferences for healthcare or medical treatment for a time in the future if you no longer have capacity to make that decision. It's often used to refuse medical treatment, and in some states and territories, it can also be used to appoint a decision maker, so someone else to make decisions for us. A person cannot request voluntary assisted dying in advance in their directive. And the reason for that is that VAD can't be requested after a person has lost capacity. So our VAD laws require the person accessing VAD to retain decision-making capacity right up until the final act, which is having the VAD medication. In addition to advanced care directives, or instead of, a person can choose to have another type of legal document, appointing someone else to make decisions for them. These documents are called something different in each state and territory, but common example is an enduring power of attorney in Queensland, or an enduring power of guardianship in New South Wales or WA. Again, though, VAD cannot be requested in advance in those documents for the same reasons as for an advanced care directive. If the person hasn't made any of these documents and they lack decision-making capacity for a decision, then the law in each state and territory sets out who else can decide for them. And it's usually someone close to the person. So their spouse or adult child or another relative or close friend. These types of decision makers and family members also can't request VAD on the person's behalf, and that's because VAD must be a voluntary choice made by the person when they have decision-making capacity. Going back to your question about validity of advanced care directives, so generally health professionals must follow a person's directive if it's valid. So it'll be valid if the person had capacity when they made it voluntarily, it applies to the medical treatment decision that's needed, and it meets any other legislative requirements like being witnessed. There are some times, though, when a health professional does not have to follow an advanced care directive. An example is when the instructions in a person's directive are so unclear or ambiguous that the doctor doesn't know what the person wants. So I guess some of the practical advice I have about ensuring that your documents are followed is to be really clear and specific about what treatment you're consenting to or refusing. So doing things like when you're writing your directive, providing really clear examples or details about the circumstances that you'd refuse treatment in. Of course, discussing with your GP or another doctor what decisions might be needed for you in the future relating to your condition is quite important, because they can let you know about the risks and benefits of various future treatment options, life-prolonging treatment, what they might do, and that will help you to inform your decision. And the main thing is making sure your directive or your other documents are really easy to locate, because sometimes we have them and they can't be followed because clinicians can't access them when they need to. So, providing it to someone you trust, like a family member or a close friend, discussing your preferences with those people so they know what you want, uploading your directive to My Health record so it can be accessed. Those are some of the things you can do to make sure that your directive can be found when it's needed.
The second most common thing that comes up with us is in relation to the use of morphine at the end of life, and in particular in palliative care, which is where many, many people end up, regardless of the original nature of their illness. Most commonly, I get asked, why are they giving enough morphine to keep them unconscious until they effectively die of starvation and dehydration, but not quite enough to simply end their life when there's actually no question that they're going to have the same clinical outcome regardless. Can you explain to us, please, in terms lay people can understand, exactly what the law says about the use of morphine by clinicians at the end of life and what the doctrine of double effect is?
As you know, at the end of life, clinicians might use morphine or they might use other types of medication for pain relief. And sometimes that medication can have a double effect. So it can relieve a person's pain and symptoms, but it can also potentially hasten a person's death. Under Australian law, a health professional won't be legally responsible for a person's death in that type of situation, so long as when they gave the medication, their intention was to relieve the person's pain and symptoms and not to cause or hasten their death. And that legal protection is called the doctrine of double effect. So for the protection to apply, it's all about intention. So the intention has to be to provide pain relief only, not to hasten or cause the person's death. The person has to be near death. The medication has to be prescribed and administered by a doctor or nurse practitioner, or it has to be administered by someone else but under that practitioner's orders. And the medication also has to be given in accordance with good medical practice. So it needs to be appropriately titrated, and health professionals have to use reasonable care and skill to ensure that the right medication and the right dose is given. Now, in the case of palliative sedation, which you were just talking about, again, so long as the intention is to relieve pain and not to cause death, the doctrine of double effect would apply in that situation also and protect the health professional administering the pain relief. And also, because we're talking about voluntary assisted dying today, just wanted to clarify that the appropriate provision of pain relief with the intention of relieving pain and symptoms is not ending life. It's very distinct from our voluntary assisted dying laws and framework. But having said that, of course, a person who is accessing VAD can receive that palliative care or that pain relief right up until they have the VAD medication.
Now, you've recently done a podcast. Your latest episode was called Voluntary Assisted Dying, First Conversations, a Practical Discussion for GPs. In it, you were joined by GP Dr. Sarah Townend, who is Clinical Director of New South Wales VAD Support Services, and Dr. Madeline Archer, who is a postgraduate researcher on assisted dying law and practice, end-of-life decision-making, regulatory theory and criminal law. Thanks for making the rest of us feel so terribly inadequate. Now, that podcast is based on their 2025 Australian Journal of General Practice article titled First Conversations About Voluntary Assisted Dying in General Practice. You already have so many terrific training and guidance resources you've outlined earlier that you've developed for clinicians and a comprehensive VAD curriculum through your Module 11. So what prompted you to start using the podcast format as well? How did that all come about, Penny?
For the ELLC training, we were interested in developing a practical podcast for GPs about a legal topic, given their important role in end-of-life care and given the changes to general practice that arise from the advent of voluntary assisted dying, becoming a lawful end-of-life option in Australia, in most of Australia. We thought VAD would be a great topic. We also know from our research at QUT that community members rely on, especially on their GPs, but also doctors and nurses as a key source of information about the law. So again, it's really important that doctors in particular are very familiar with voluntary assisted dying laws. And also, as more community members become aware of VAD as an option, they will likely turn to their doctors increasingly for information about the process. So Sarah and Maddie and other colleagues had developed and published the article you mentioned. It's an excellent article. It's got a great overview of having first conversations and some really practical tips, especially for GPs who might not have been in the position of being asked about VAD previously, or they might be uncertain about whether it's something they can raise if they feel it's clinically appropriate. So we thought that would make a good topic. And we know that GPs are very time poor. And while we would love them to all be doing our online modules, we know that time's a factor, but also that they enjoy different learning formats like all of us. So we thought we might put the information in a podcast so they have the option of either listening to it from two of the co-authors or accessing it online and having a read.
Two things stood out for me when I listened to that episode. The first was just how awful it is for the doctors personally when they do have to tell someone that, all your tests are in, and unfortunately you're terminal, you're going to die, there's nothing else we can do to help you and you only have a short time to live. The second thing was the sheer amount of data collection, administration and record keeping needed when it comes to end-of-life discussions, and in particularly the legal requirements, as you mentioned earlier, around voluntary assisted dying and the conversations they have with patients about that. I know a lot of people, especially GPs, are very unhappy at the moment about being unable to use the telehealth, as well as facing significant issues in the way different state VADs work in terms of doctors being remunerated under the Commonwealth MBS. So what are some of the other issues you see with the current suite of VAD laws, and what improvements would you like to see considered at their statutory reviews in the legislation to address those issues?
Yeah, my colleagues at the Australian Centre for Health Law Research in our end-of-life research program have conducted a lot of research in recent years, not only with doctors and nurses involved in VAD, but patients who are seeking VAD and their families and carers. And we've heard a lot about the challenges accessing and delivering VAD. So there are some legislative changes that we'd like to see. And as you've already mentioned, one of the most significant changes that we think needs to happen is the amendments to the Commonwealth Criminal Code so that it does not apply to VAD, and so that it clarifies that VAD is not suicide. And that would be a game changer. It would support more equitable access to VAD and reduce delays. It would enable the use of telehealth for appointments and emailing of prescriptions. And it would, of course, remove the burden of travel for very unwell patients, especially those out in the bush who are seeking VAD. We'd also like to see the reform of laws relating to institutions. So there are minimum requirements in all states' legislation ensuring that people have access to VAD no matter where they are cared for, and that their right to access VAD is not obstructed in any way.
Just to clarify, that would include hospitals, hospices and faith-based organisations
Indeed.
and aged care homes?
Indeed, in all jurisdictions. And there are, of course, some jurisdictions whose laws already have safeguards that ensure access for patients in institutions, but some jurisdictions don't have those laws. And so we would like to see, as I said, a minimum set of requirements there. Across Australia, we'd also like to see the timeframes for accessing VAD removed, as is the case with the ACT's legislation, which has no timeframe around VAD access, or expanded in jurisdictions that currently have a 6-month timeframe. And it was really great to see Victoria's recent reforms around that. They're amending their timeframe from 12 months, from 6 months, commencing next April. That will be one less jurisdiction that has the 6-month timeframe. There are also a number of systems changes in an ideal world that we would love to see. 2 main areas, and you've already mentioned, is improved remuneration for VAD practitioners and better support for the VAD clinical workforce, so that VAD is sustainable. And we've recently published an article about that, which highlights some of the barriers and the challenges around remuneration and workforce support. And I guess finally, there are still really low levels of VAD literacy among the Australian public. And my colleagues again published an article recently, and it was about a study we conducted with community members in Queensland about their knowledge of VAD. And only 1/3 of participants correctly identified that VAD was legal. Only 26% of participants said they would know how to go about accessing VAD if they wanted to. So that really demonstrates that community education initiatives are needed to improve the community's knowledge around that, as well as education of health practitioners, especially GPs who community members are going to turn to, and that education can support this.
Penny Neller, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Suzanne. And if your listeners are interested in learning more about any of the topics we've discussed, please feel free to visit End of Life Law in Australia. So our website is end-of-life.qut.edu.au. And for the ELLC training program and our free modules, you can visit ELLC.edu.au.
And for those of you who are subscribers to our VAD Media Watch, you will be receiving that information in an upcoming issue when I do the write-up for this podcast. So thank you, Penny. You've been listening to Penny Neller, Project Manager for End of Life Law for Clinicians, Queensland University of Technology. She's been talking about the critically important training and development programs her centre has for the current and future end-of-life clinical workforce. In an upcoming episode, I'll be talking to Alice Morrison, who is the VAD Care Navigator in Western Australia, where they have brokered a real solution around doctor remuneration who do VAD work. I'm Suzanne James. Thanks for joining us on Nightshift.